Hi there, this is Jeanette Comerford for Whimsy Stamps. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create this shaker card. It features images from Whimsy Stamps' October 2015 release, and I'll be taking you through the card making process from start to finish. The first thing I did was I took a piece of Neenah cardstock. I cut that in half. One half will serve as my card base, and the rest will serve to stamp the image and other components. I am just trimming the rubber stamp. This is Penguins Carrying Tree stamp, and I'm trimming the excess rubber off so that it will stamp more evenly. I'm just using this pair of scissors to do that. And I'll just remove the backing from the stamp and put it onto my mounting block here. And I'll use Memento Tuxedo black ink to stamp the image. For the coloration, because the penguins, the stamp itself has a dot detail on this sort of portion of their body, I didn't want to go too dark with my coloration. So I am using C3, C5, and then C7 will be my darkest color. That way, in the end, you'll still sort of see some of that dot detail come through the coloration. And so, as I usually do, I started with my light and then blended with my mid-tone, added my darkest color where I want the most shadows, and then blended out with my mid color, and then finally with my lightest color. I felt like it wasn't dark enough in some areas, so I did go back in with my C5 and added a little bit more, and then I blended it out with my C3. For their faces and for the tummy, I didn't want to leave it plain white. I wanted to add a little bit of sort of shadow, but not too much. I still wanted them to look white. So I used C1 and then blended it out with the colorless blender. I'm going to be coloring all the penguins using the same marker colors and using the same technique. I chose cool gray markers because they have more of a blue undertone when compared to the warm gray. The warm gray has more of a brown undertone, so I thought the cool gray suited the penguins a little bit better. And you can see that this is quite a fast image to color. And I'll just again give a little bit of shadow on the face and on the tummy. For the smallest penguin, I did start with my mid color. I didn't start with my lightest color. I just felt that because it was such a small image that I might get some bleeding if I put too much marker. So I skipped that first initial step. I still went in with my dark and then blended it out with my mid, and then used the lightest marker just that one time to complete the blend. For their feet, I am using YR31 as my lightest color. I went in next with YR07, and I wasn't really happy with how that looked. I felt like it was too bright. And so I took YR23 and covered over that. I colored over it. And that muted the color a little bit. And so then I blended out again with my YR31, and I was happier with how their feet looked. When I did their beaks, I just used YR31 and 23. I didn't use any of the YR07. For the tree, because I know that I want to sort of give the needle detail, so I want all the pine needles to be showing when I finish my coloration, I'm going to base the entire tree with my lightest color. So I'm just coloring the whole thing in, and that will be the base, and then I will add the needles on with two darker colors. So this is YG63, and I'm using the drawing on the tree to guide me in the direction of where the needles should be going. So I'm just using feathering strokes, sort of very fine lines I'm drawing, and I'm moving with the direction of the tree. So you can take your cues from the needles that are drawn on the tree and just extend past those. And you don't have to be super careful. Just sort of go with the flow, and it will look nice. And I will leave that to dry, because if I went in with another color, because the ink is wet, it would just blend. So I'm going to actually let that dry. Just doing the tree trunk now with 3 shades of earth tones. Then I move to the scarves on the penguins. Just very quickly color those in. I'm using our 30, 32, and 35 for the smallest penguin. And I'm just going back and forth, adding color, blending it out. If I find that the color isn't deep enough or dark enough, I go back in with the darker shade and add a little more contrast. You can see that I'm going to do that right now until you get it to look the way you want. I'm going to use shades of Aqua for the hat here. So I used BG11, BG10, BG13. And again, I just went back and forth with the colors, blending until I had the look I wanted. So now my tree is dry enough. That last marker color has dried, so I can go in with my darkest color now and add some more detail. I'm paying special attention to any areas where there is a shadow being cast on the tree. So where the penguin is casting a shadow on the tree, or where there's sections of the tree lying on top of one another, I'm making sure that those areas get a nice dark sort of coloration. And then extending from that, I will draw some more fine lines. I don't go all the way to the bottom. That way I still get some contrast, some sort of light, some dark, and it gives the tree dimension. Again, it's important to wait in between steps on this so that your colors don't all blend together. Now I just took some colorless blender and blended out some of that aqua color that got on the cuff of the hat, and I will color the final scarf. I'm using B93 B95 B97. Again, because it's a small area, I didn't start with my light color, I started with my mid, and it blends just nicely and I don't get any bleeding. So just touching up a few areas, making sure there's enough shadow there. I am going to add some dot detail to the cuffs of the hat and the pom-pom, and then I thought I would extend that to their bellies as well, sort of mimic the dot detail that's already on their bodies. So that is C1, a little bit of C3, and then I will sort of soften that up with a little bit colorless blender. A little bit more of the mid color, just filling in some areas that were a bit too light. And now the coloration is pretty much done. I'm just adding some Wink of Stella black pen and some Sharpie poster paint for the highlights for the eyes and for some of the white areas. And then I'll just use my scissors to fussy cut the entire image out. So here it is all cut out. I went back in with the Sharpie poster paint and added some dots to their hats and scarves. And now we'll start the card base. So this is that piece of Neenah we put aside. I'm folding it in half. I'm taking the rest of the Neenah that we used and I'm using some stitched rectangle dies. And I am cutting out a window by using those two. I'll go ahead and use a smaller one, and this is just a piece of scrap cardstock, a nice light blue color. And then these are the stitched border die trios. I'm using two of them and I'm cutting that sort of middle part of the window, and this will be snowbanks for the card. And they have a nice stitch detail on them as well. So now I'm just putting all the components together to get an idea of where everything is going to go. I want to add a sentiment, and I have the new SnowFlake Wishes clear polymer set here. Originally I had wanted to use the Christmas Joy, but because that's on two lines it didn't fit very well on my card, so I'm using Peace, Love and Joy, which is just all in one line. And they have some really nice snowflakes. I'm using some of the smaller ones. So I'll just use my little embossing buddy here, sort of an anti-static tool, and I'll keep my penguins there as a guide as I stamp the snowflakes with Versamark ink. This way I know exactly where they should be placed. And then I'll just use some embossing powder, sprinkle that on, shake it off, and I used my heat gun to melt the embossing powder. To make sure that I'm going to be adhering that onto my card in the exact proper place, I put my mat onto the card base and then adhere my insert. That way I know they're aligned. Then I'll just sort of place everything, make sure it's where I want it to be, and instead of lifting them off and putting them back on, I'm just holding them down and adhering the sides. That's sort of a quick way to do it. And then I decided to add some snowflakes with the Sharpie poster paint pen. And now I'll just go ahead and make sure that I'm stamping the sentiment in the right place and that it won't be hidden by the frame. And what I do is I just take my mounting block that has a grid mark on it and I line it up with the grid mark on my mat. And that way I know when I go back in after it's been inked up that it's straight and in the right place. And that was just some Hero Arts soft pull ink. So I'm going to adhere a piece of acetate. I did go back and cut that out with the large rectangle. I had forgotten to do it before. And then once that acetate is on, I will adhere my penguins. And because I'm going to be adding not just sequins but some glitter to this shaker card, I'm going to go ahead and use my anti-static tool and just sort of rub that all over the image and the acetate. That way the glitter won't stick to the acetate or on top of the image. It will shake off. So this is just some foam adhesive, and I cut it in half so that I have a double layer. And that way the adhesive is high enough that there is some space between it and the rest of the card. And that way the shaker elements can move around. I think that sometimes if you just have one layer of this adhesive, the elements sort of get stuck in the card and they don't move about as freely. So I'm just trimming it as I go so that it's the right size. And then just to be extra safe, I ran that anti-static tool over it again. Now I'm just adding some sequins, some aqua ones, some white ones, and there is that glitter. It's sort of a fine glitter. And just be careful when you're pulling the tape off here that you don't accidentally sort of shake it too much. And then you just align it and you have a shaker card. Thank you so much for watching. A full list of supplies and links, as well as the Copic markers used, can be found below this video in the description or on my blog dated October 12th, 2015.